Hey, what's up, guys? Josiah here with EasyCaters.com, and today I wanted to do a fresh demo video of the uh, latest version of the relative volume indicators that are available on my website. This set has come a long way since I originally released it, going on probably 2 years ago now. And this kind of reflects, in some ways, the growth of my own trading and how I've, things that I've learned along the way and so forth. When we originally started out, this was just kind of a relative raw share volume indicator where we were just looking at, the time-based average of volume and comparing the current bar's volume um, to that average. And so it still does that, and that's great. But I found over the years that that type of signaling has a little bit more noise in it than what I prefer. And so I have since kind of gone through this process of searching for ways to reduce that noise and finding the most valuable signals from volume. And so this indicator is kind of developed along the way along those lines. And so now it went through this process of using shares per trade as a signaling component there, and then we switched or added the ability to look at shares per range. And there's lots of different types of ranges that you can use to kind of hone that in on what you're looking for. And then I started looking at shares per trade per range. And that's kind of what I'm using in my own trading plan currently. And then also just shares per range on the larger time frame charts like monthly and quarterly and weekly and so forth. But so all those capabilities are now in the indicator, and I wanted to kind of go over some of those features and show both how I use them and some other areas that the indicator has some features that can be interesting for some of you. Um, Trading is kind of like a scientific type of endeavor. We're doing these, constantly testing the data and finding new valuable ways to approach the market. And so it's kind of just like being a tinkerer or a scientist in there trying to find, uh, you know, those little sources of edge that we can find. And so this indicator has a lot of possibilities in that area as well, where I have some features in here that I've not even had the time to explore myself that I think have the potential, at least, for some additional edge that some of you out there might be able to use to find in your own trading. So let's dive into it. So the kind of flagship of this indicator set is just the all-in-one relative volume indicator. And so if I pull this up, you can see here in settings, this is version 2.6 beta 1. And if my computer will catch up with this video that we're taking here, it's kind of slowing things down. But so there are multiple modes that the indicator can be set in. So we have the moving average based mode, which basically, is your typical, we look at a moving average of volume or whatever volume source you choose. And then it compares the current volume source to that average and finds the percentage of that average, and then we get our relative volume from that. Then there's the time-based average, which compares bar by bar. So this bar on this time of day has usually trades 100,000 shares on this bar. So what is today's bar trading, and how does that compare to the 100,000 shares that it normally trades on that bar per day? So and you can use that on not only in the intraday charts now, but you can also use that on the longer term charts like the daily, weekly, monthly, and so forth. I think it's most valuable on the intraday charts, but it does now work on the longer term charts as well. And then I've added recently this blended mode, which takes both of these types of averages and blends them together. And so now you can choose a weighting to apply to the time-based average. So if it's set at 50%, then both the moving average mode and the time-based mode are weighted equally, 50% each. Whereas if you up the time-based weighting to say 75%, then there's only 25% of weighting left to the moving average mode. So you can kind of find your own mix that works for you there and kind of take the best of both worlds approach to those. Um, and then as far as, like a moving average mode, if you set it to that, then you can choose whatever type of average you want to use, a simple, exponential, weighted average, Wilder's average, or a whole average. I like the whole average, and other than that one, sometimes I use the simple or the exponential. Um, and so you can kind of customize it further that way. Then you choose the length for your average. So that can be both for the moving average or on the time-based average. This means the number of periods that you're looking back. So if we're looking at an intraday chart, this would be 10 days back, or on a daily chart, this would be 10 weeks back. And on a monthly chart or on a weekly chart, this would be 10 years back and so forth. So it's how many periods overall, and then you can specify to either automatically find the number of bars in that period or manually specify your own number of bars. So say we're on like a daily chart, and typically it will use the weekly setting, so it'll compare this week's Monday bar to last week's Monday bar, and the average from several weeks prior, 10 weeks prior on this setting. And so it will create this kind of day of week average. But if you wanted it to be a yearly average, of this particular bar every year, the 365th bar of the year, or actually, in trading days would be 252, bar 252 this year, last year, the year prior, and so forth. Then you can kind of customize that and say, I want to average 5 years, and each year has 252 bars. So that's how you would set up a time-based average on a daily chart to look at the last 5 years worth of this bar and compare this bar's volume to all those prior days throughout the last 5 years. So there's lots of different customization options you could do here. Next, the auto mode is the easiest one, of course, and that's, it takes care of both of mostly anything you need. But if you want to really dial in some type of time-based average here, you can set it to manual and adjust that as needed. As far as volume sources, that's the next step. So what volume actually gets plugged into the average system to figure out what the relative volume is? Well, you can start with just raw share volume, or shares per trade, or shares per range, or shares per range percent, shares per trade per range, shares per trade per range percent. So there's all these different combinations that you can use now. Then you can switch to trade volume. How many trades have actually happened? Trades per range percent. Then you can look at dollar volume per trade, dollar volume per range percent, all these different combinations. I've just recently started adding open interest per range, shares divided by open interest, shares divided by open interest divided by range, and so forth. And same thing with ticks, trades, all kinds of different combinations here. Then we've got implied volatility. And so the open interest is going to be mostly useful on options or futures. Implied volatility can be used elsewhere and on stocks and so forth. And so you can do IV divided by range, shares divided by IV, all different kind of combinations you can do here. Shares times IV, shares times IV divided by range. So there's all kinds of different combinations here that I haven't even explored. I haven't even scratched the surface of, of this. I've just kind of, I've had people throw suggestions to me, and I'm like, yeah, that could make sense. And so I'll, tinker around with it and add that as a function that they can then take and explore on their own. And so that's what some of these are for. And then finally, I have this market volume and market volume per range. So what this does is actually allow you to specify one of the built-in Thinkorswim indicator symbols. And so if you go in here to the symbol selector, you'll notice there's all kinds of exchange indicator data that Thinkorswim allows us to look at. And so you can actually take all of the volume traded on all of the markets in the United States and create uh, an indicator that will highlight the current stock that you're looking at based on how much volume the market as a whole is doing. And in addition, you can look at market volume per range, which allows you to look at, okay, so is this stock today trading a wide range compared to how much volume is trading in the overall market, or is it trading a narrow range compared to how much volume is traded in the overall market? And so there's lots of different functionalities here, and there's so many different indicator symbols here that Thinkorswim allows you to look at, and I haven't even scratched the surface of that either. So that's an area that some of you guys can explore as well. And then for these volume source settings that allow you to specify a range, volume per range or whatever, you can specify what type of range here: true range, high plus low plus wicks plus gaps, or high minus low plus wicks plus gaps. So different types of range choices here that you can play around with. VWAP range would be like the last bar's VWAP to this bar's VWAP. What was that change? And so it would base the range on that amount of change. And so there's all kinds of different settings in here that you can play with. Wicks only is an interesting thing that I've started playing around with, since wicks can represent some demand areas and so forth. So I thought that would be a good an interesting place to explore. And next, you're going to set your volume thresholds, your percentage thresholds for your volume. So by default, it's going to come at 100 through 200. And so what it means is when 100% would be exactly average. And then as it reaches these increasing thresholds above the average, then it highlights the brighter and brighter colors on the chart and on the volume subgraph and so forth. And so that allows you to, if you're getting too many signals, you can raise these thresholds so that you get fewer signals. And if you get too few signals, then you can lower these to get some more signals. And it's going to vary sometimes by the chart. Most stocks are going to be kind of the same. Most futures are going to be kind of the same, but every now and then you'll have a stock that's getting a lot of, just getting hammered by volume from the public. And so you'll get tons of signals that day or something. And so it might look kind of weird on the chart, and you'll just need to adjust it for that day or something like that. So those thresholds are all changeable. Then you've got your settings to show colorized volume. So you can turn that on or off down here in the subgraph. You can show paint bars, which colors the price graph. You can turn that on or off and leave the bar color as usual if you want it to be. You can turn the subgraph off altogether and save screen real estate and just use this as an upper indicator only that only colors the price bars and doesn't have the histogram. And then you can also use this on Heikin-Ashi mode. So if you switch your chart to Heikin-Ashi, that has a different bar formation structure than the typical OHLC bars or candles. And so I've added a mode in here that will allow you to compensate for that and color the bars the color that the normal Heikin-Ashi bars would be colored. So if it's red on Heikin-Ashi, then it would be one of the red colorations on the relative volume and so forth. So that just compensates for that Heikin-Ashi difference between OHLC bars and so forth. Then you've got, some plots for your average line, and you've got your coloration scheme down here that you can completely customize as needed. You can change how the histogram appears and so forth. But all the colors for the coloration of the price graph and the histogram are customizable. So that is the all-in-one relative volume indicator, and there's a lot there. But that's what I use every day in my trading, and there's a lot of potential there for other people to kind of expand and create their own trading plans based on some of those different functionalities. My favorite settings are, as you can see down here, I use a time-based average with 10 period, 10 days on my intraday charts, and I set it to shares per trade per range on the intraday chart with a true range setting or a high-low range setting. They're kind of close to each other. And then these, I leave my typical, thresholds up there and so forth. So that's what I use on intraday usually. And then on the longer term charts, I will typically just use a moving average mode. And so you can see this on, I think this is Schwab. So I just use a moving average that is based on a whole average over 10 bars. And on the longer term charts, sometimes it helps to use range percentage instead of absolute price range, because the longer term charts are going to show much bigger ranges in the later portion of the chart as volatility, absolute price changes get much larger in an uptrend. And so percentage can kind of compensate for that. So dollars per dollar volume per range percent, that can be a good setting for those longer term charts. Or you can just use volume per range. So those are kind of the settings that I use for my long-term charts. And I use the time based on the intraday charts. But I usually stick to just a kind of round number like 10 for the average period. And, I try to keep things as, objective as possible instead of just, plugging in, 11 as my, moving average that's, somehow magical or something. No, I mean, I just choose a nice, if I want a short average, I might choose 5 or 10. If I want a long average, I might choose 20 or, 40 or 50 or whatever. But, just find something and stick to it. Don't try to get the perfect average. So that's the all-in-one indicator, and that works on any of these time frames and so forth. The moving average mode works on tick-based charts as well as time-based charts, but no kind of volume indicator works on range-based charts. So you can't use the range-based charts, Rinko or whatever. You can use the Heikin-Ashi and the tick-based charts. At least if you set the modes correctly for those, it will work fine. So next would be the columns. And I have a list of items that are included in this study set. So we have the all-in-one indicator, and we have the just some add-ons here that show labels up in your top. And I can kind of show you where this would show up. Like on a 30-minute or I usually use it on a 30-minute. You can turn on your extended hours for this one. If you have an extended hours chart that you use, this needs to have the extended hours showing. And so you can add this indicator and it will show labels up here on the top showing, okay, what's the relative overnight volume last night? What's the relative pre-market volume only? What's the relative aftermarket from last night? What's the regular hours relative volume compared to how the regular hours has been before? And then also this interesting one, which is the opening range relative volume. So all of those things can be displayed in your top left corner of your extended hours chart with this indicator. That's just a little bonus that I kind of throw in there. I like to just give little, I'm always programming things, and, I have these tools just kind of laying around that I don't necessarily use every day, but I think some people will probably find some value in. So I like to throw those in as little bonuses. So next would be the columns. So I've got columns included for all these different scenarios. You've got the time-based columns and the MA-based columns. And so these columns will do, for the intraday time-based, they'll do relative volume, relative shares per range, relative shares per trade, or like I said, the shares per trade per range, which is what I typically use. Then MA-based, these take up a little bit fewer resources on your system because they're not that more complex average type. And also the MA-based works on any time frame, so that helps for your daily or weekly or monthly columns if you want to set those columns to those time frames and see relative volume signals on those time frames. The MA-based relative volume is where to go for that. And so these include relative volume per range, and then on intraday you can do relative shares per trade, because that trade data is only available in Thinkorswim on the intraday time frames. So, and then you can do relative shares per trade per range on the intraday time frames as well. So, and that's not something I try to limit you with. That's just Thinkorswim. They don't provide the trade count data for daily and above charts, only for intraday charts. Then it also includes, and as an example, you can see I use these every day. These are my relative volume per trade per range columns that I can sort my whole watch list and get the latest signals for each time frame sorted to the top and the bottom of my list. And you can do that. So I have a 5, 10, 15, 20, 20 or 30 and 60 time frame for my intraday charts that I can just pull up signals on each of those time frames as the time frame rolls over to the new candle or whatever. So if the hour just ended, I can pull up all the hourly signals and so forth. So that's how I use that. The scans that are included are right here. This includes and these are all MA based because I have not been able to find a way to reduce the complexity of the scans for the time-based average mode. I haven't been able to get those set up to effectively run scans for time-based relative volume, but the MA-based works pretty well, especially on the longer time frames like daily and monthly and so forth. And it works perfectly intraday as long as you're not right at the open or right at the close, because right at the open and the close we get those volume surges and that throws the moving averages off just a little bit. So MAs work pretty well most of the time. It's just those particular times of day that they kind of get skewed. And so I think these scans work pretty well for what they are. And you can, the ones of those that are available are just the relative volume, volume per range, volume per trade, and shares per trade per range. And those ones that incorporate trade count, these last two are available for intraday only, like I said, just because of how Thinkorswim is set up. And then I just throw in some other bonuses here that some people have asked for and mentioned and so forth. I've used these to kind of filter my lists in the morning to find stocks that have high relative overnight volume or pre-market volume. Especially in earnings season, you get a lot of the gaps that have these high pre-market volume, and you want to see how high that pre-market volume is compared to what it usually does. So like there's certain stocks like I think MU is one that just kind of has overnight volume pretty much every night, and so sometimes it's hard to tell if the pre-market volume is unusual, if it's unusually high or unusually low, and so forth. So these columns kind of help you sort through that. And then I've got a couple of indicators and columns here that show the absolute amount of aftermarket volume, pre-market volume, and overnight volume. And so there's a column and an indicator that show all three of those things as well, just as a cumulative amount throughout the evening or whatever. So, and then to kind of demonstrate those overnight ticks and so forth, let me clear this up a little bit so you can see them a little better. So relative aftermarket ticks, relative aftermarket volume. So you can sort your list to bring the highest aftermarket volume stocks to the top of the list here. And so after it exceeds 100%, it starts turning gray. At 200%, it starts turning a lighter gray. 300, a white color. And then I think it's 400 or 500, you can set it so it'll, highlight yellow or whatever. So these, and then there's, there's the cyan color or whatever. So these just highlight in kind of a similar way to the indicator where they get brighter and brighter as the volume gets more and more unusual. And then we got the pre-market ticks and pre-market volume, so you can sort by both of those. And so you can see there's some differences. So the pre-market ticks has a couple that are a little bit higher that the volume didn't catch, the share volume didn't catch. And then overnight ticks, sometimes this will have, you can see here there's the pre-market where there was several that had high aftermarket volume, but not all of them had high pre-market volume. And so relative overnight can lump all that together and say, okay, how much is it altogether relative to what it usually is? And or you can kind of parse it down and look at just the pre-market and just the aftermarket either way. So that's there to look at either both together or each individually. So that's how that works. And I think this video is getting a little bit long, so I'm probably going to cut it short there. You can see on the YouTube, I have a full playlist of all the videos kind of recapping trades that I've taken using the relative volume indicator. So this is not just theory for me. This is what I trade with every single day. And I started posting daily videos showing the trades that I've taken, trades that I missed, setups that looked good that I just didn't happen to see, and some trades that looked good but then failed. So you can check out those playlists on YouTube and see some further information on these types of signals and how I trade with them. And like I said, there's probably all kinds of different ways to trade with these that I'm not even capable of knowing. But at least you can see how I use these every day and hopefully get some value from there. So anyway, I just wanted to run through the new updates to the indicator and show everyone what comes with the indicator set and everything. And so hopefully that helps, and we will talk to you later. Thanks, guys.